Welcome to class number 2 of Discipleship Academy. Who is God to me? That's the question we're going to deal with in this episode, in this class. Let me ask you this. Who or what do you think God is? That's a big question, right? That's one that we often think about. I get asked as a pastor this question all the time. Who is God, right? What is God? Because, the world that we live in, there's a lot of answers to that, right? It's a higher power. I believe he's a higher power. I believe that God is he's out there, he made everything, but then once he did, he just kind of disappeared, right? He kind of made it and then left. Or some people believe God just doesn't exist, or maybe he's there, maybe he's not. Is God one of many gods in this pantheon of them, or is there just one? There's so many questions. And here's the thing, as Christians, we've chosen to dedicate our lives to him, right? That was the last class, is that choice. We chose to dedicate ourselves to God. And so if we're going to do that, it makes sense that we understand who God is, right? I mean, would you want to commit your life to somebody and not even know who they are? Of course not. So in this class, we're going to talk about who God is. And the Bible gives many names to God that demonstrate different attributes of who he is. And we're going to look at some of those in this class. You got to keep in mind that particularly when you're dealing with the Bible, when you're dealing with ancient times, names meant a whole lot more than they do now. People name their kids now just based on what's trendy, or they'll name them after celebrities, or name them after, here's a name that my dad had, or here's a name of a friend, right? They might name them just because they think it sounds cool, right? But back then, when people gave a name to a child, they weren't giving them the name as much as they were giving them a specific attribute. They were speaking something over that person by naming them. And so names carried tremendous weight. The meaning of names carried tremendous weight. It's why in the Bible you see times where God changes a person's name when he changes their direction, because names were important. They carried with them tremendous value. And so when God says, here's my name, right, we need to pay very close attention. And the Bible uses a lot of different names for God. We're going to look at several of those in this class. But the main name for God in Hebrew was spelled something like YHWH. English translation for this, and if you're going to pronounce it in Hebrew, which they didn't pronounce out loud, by the way, they would not say this name out loud. But what they would simply say is Yahweh, would be the pronunciation, Yahweh. Now, in English, when we look at a translation of this, you might pronounce that YHWH as Yehovah, right? So instead of a YHWH, it would be YHVH, right? Yehovah. So if you hear Jehovah, right, it's kind of an English version of Yahweh. So if somebody says Yahweh, they're right. If someone says Jehovah, they're right, okay? It's just a different way. So there's a lot of weird arguments we can get into over stuff like that. If someone says Jehovah, don't correct them, okay? It's just an English version of this. And simply what it means is this. It means I am, right? Or it means to be, or to create, or self-sustaining. When Moses was being sent into Pharaoh, that's one of the things that he asked, right? Well, who should I tell them sent me? In other words, God, what is your name? And God says, my name is I am that I am. Right? What does that mean? It means I am because I am. What it also means is I am not because you are. Right? You are because I am. If he's God speaking, you exist because God exists. If God did not exist, you don't exist. You are sustained by him. But when God says, I am that I am, it means that I exist because I exist. I sustain myself. I don't need anyone else to sustain me. And when he says, tell Pharaoh that I am who I am sent you, what he was actually saying is remind him that he was created and you were sent by the one who was not. The name I am, the name Yahweh or Yehovah, what it simply means is I am. It means to be. It means to create. It means self-sustaining. We're going to be learning a few of these different names and what they mean to us, because the word Yahweh or Yehovah, it is a predecessor to several other names that go with it. So to keep things simple, assume for a moment we're going to just use this one definition, I am. It's the most common way of translating this name. Now, I'm going to be saying Jehovah. If you prefer Yahweh, that works too, okay? That works too. You can switch them out. But I want to look at a few of the attributes of God, particularly based on the names God chooses to give himself. So here's the first one, Jehovah Rohi. And it means the Lord is my shepherd, right? The Lord my shepherd. Jehovah Rohi is a shepherd. Now, what's the job of a shepherd? If you think about it, shepherds, they watch over the sheep, right? They take care of them. They make sure that predators are kept away. A shepherd's job is to make sure that the sheep stay safe. It's to shear them, right? To cut their hair and to do maintenance on them. It's to cut away things that would make them too hot and could cause them problems. It's to lead them to places where they can eat. I learned one of these things about sheep. And it's interesting. I didn't know a lot about sheep until I really started studying Scripture. And I learned more about it. And the more I learned about sheep, the more I realized how unflattering it is that God calls us sheep. Sheep are not smart animals. They're just not. One of the things I learned is that a sheep will actually eat the grass that's right in front of it and will continue to eat and eat even when the grass is gone, and will continue to try to just eat the dirt to try to get the roots, even though maybe a foot in front of it is fresh grass. It could just take a couple of steps and get it. A shepherd will actually have to push the sheep forward to eat a different spot so they can get better food. A shepherd's job is to do that. And so when we say the Lord is our shepherd, when we say Jehovah Rohi or Yahweh Rohi, we're saying that God is our shepherd. He protects us. He provides for us. He moves us ahead. He feeds us. He leads us and guides us and watches over us and loves us and cares for us. Another name that is a very common one, and probably this is the one, if people know a name of God, this is probably the one that they know, and it is Jehovah Jireh. It's probably the most common name. And it means the Lord my provider. The Lord is my provider. What has God provided for you? If you look at your life, if you look at how God has blessed you, if you look how God has been in your life, how has God provided for you? And you might say, well, I just became a Christian. He hasn't provided anything yet. You're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. The fact that you're breathing right now, God provided you breath. He provided you life. He provided you a body that works. You're listening to me speak right now. That means God provided you ears that work. You're able to comprehend what I'm saying. That means God provided you a brain that can understand and learn and grow. You have friends and you have relationships, and you might have your husband or your wife or your kids, your mother, your father, family. God has provided you with all kinds of things. You may not even realize it, but God has been at work in your life this whole time. Everything you have because God's provided for you. Everything I have because God's provided it for me. God is my provider. Every good thing that we have comes from him. God is our provider. Another name for God is Jehovah or Yahweh Shalom. It means the Lord my peace. You think about when might it be a good time to have peace? Well, I would certainly say right now. Anybody who spends too much time watching the news loses peace, it seems like now. The world we live in is chaotic. It's scary. It is unstable and unsure, but God is always stable. He is always sure. He is always reliable. And that means that even in storms, we can have peace. God not only gives us peace, he is our peace. That means that when we cling on to him, peace is a byproduct. He is our peace. We find peace in him. Another name for God is Jehovah Rapha. This is another very common name that people know. If you know names of God, it's probably Jehovah Jireh and Jehovah Rapha, right? It's sometimes pronounced Rapha, right? So either R-A-P-H-A or R-A-P-P-A. I've seen both. It's used both, but it means the same thing. It means the Lord my healer. And what areas does God heal? You know, you hear the word healer and you might immediately think about the miracles of Jesus, right? And when you think of the miracles of Jesus, you probably think what most people think, right? He opened blind eyes. He caused deaf people to hear. People who couldn't walk, suddenly they could walk. But you know, healing goes far beyond the physical. I mean, he also had people that he met, they were demon-possessed. Spiritually, he did miracles by freeing them. Every time Jesus took a person out of depression and brought them into a new life of hope, he did a miracle. When you gave your life to God, it is very likely in that moment you felt something in you change. That's a miracle happening. It is an absolute miracle when someone's destination changes from one to the other, from hell to heaven, from death to life. It's a miracle. When marriages are restored, it's a miracle. When depression is removed, it's a miracle. When addiction is broken, it's a miracle. It is healing. All of these are healing, and God is our healer. So when we say, the Lord my healer, Jehovah Rapha, we are not just talking physically. It means that too. But if all we focus on is the healing that God can do physically, boy, we're missing out on the most important healing that he does. I mean, any person that God heals physically, they'll get sick again. At some point, that physical body that God heals, it's going to die. But the healing that takes place spiritually, that is the real miracle. That is the real healing, because that's what lasts. That's what will go forever, for eternity. Another name for God is Jehovah, and this is a tough one. Jehovah Tsidkenu. Yahweh Tsidkenu. It means the Lord my righteousness. What is righteous? Well, righteousness is it's kind of a fancy word, but it simply means this. Righteous means right standing with God. It means right standing with God. In other words, God brings us to a place where we are in right standing with him. It's a good thing too, because we couldn't do that. We have no capability to do that. We can't. It's impossible. And so what God does is he becomes our righteousness. He shifts our standing with him and makes us right with him through his son, Jesus. And he becomes our righteousness. He changes us and he makes us right standing with him. So Jehovah Tsidkenu means the Lord my righteousness. Another one is Jehovah Nisi, and it means the Lord my banner. Jehovah Nisi, the Lord my banner. Now, we don't really understand this as much now in our culture, but I want you to think about for a moment ancient warfare. When armies would clash, do you know how they knew which side they were on? Do you know how they knew which platoon was which? They carried banners to let them know what platoon they're in, to let people know what nation they belong to let people know this is the king I'm representing, this is the general I'm representing. It also works with our flags, right? Our countries now have flags. Our military, you look at their camo, and they'll have that U.S. flag on there. That's a banner. And what it means is this. It means I belong here. This is where my identity is. This is where my representation, this is who I represent. This is where I belong. I'm a citizen of this country. And the Lord, my banner, means that God identifies us as his. It means that he identifies us as belonging to him, as having citizenship in his kingdom. The next one, and this is another tough one, but it's Jehovah or Yahweh Makadesh. Jehovah Makadesh. It means the Lord my sanctifier. What does sanctify mean? Sanctify means to set apart as holy. It means that you take something and you set it aside for a special purpose and a holy purpose. And what God does is when we give our lives to him, when we choose to follow him, God takes us and moves us from where we were and sets us aside from this world, separates us in a way. We're no longer of the world. We're still in it, but we're no longer a part of it. Our citizenship has changed. Our relationship has changed. Our destination has changed. And God moves us now and sets us aside as holy. And then the last one that I want to go through, and these are not all of the names of God, by the way. There's many of them. But I want to just show you these ones to give you an idea of who God is. Here's the last one. It's Jehovah Shammah. This one actually might be my favorite. It simply means this: the Lord is present. The Lord is here. What that means is that God doesn't let us go through this life alone. It means in the deepest, darkest times of your life, God was there with you. In the moments where you celebrated, in the moments where you were weeping, in the moments where you were on the mountaintop, and in the moments where you were in the valley, God was there with you. So much so that God says, this is my name. I am the Lord who is there. I am the Lord who is present. I am with you. The Bible says he is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. He is with you through every heartbreak, through every moment. Any of those times where you thought to yourself, where is God? He was there. Whether you felt him or not, he was there. And when we finish this, and we're going to go a little bit more into this, but when we finish this, I want you to ask yourself, how has God been these things in my life? And begin to look and explore. I think you're going to see how God has been these in your life all along. And you just haven't realized it. You haven't noticed it. You weren't aware of it. See, unlike the time and culture we live in now, names meant a lot. That's why there's such significance. And I want to look at one of these examples of how names were really important, where they were changed. One of them was Jacob. Genesis 32:24 through 30 says, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was disclosed when he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And so he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And then he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. This man, we're going to say man, it said man here, but it's heavily implied this was not just a man. In fact, what most believe, it's what I believe, is this is something called a Christophany. What a Christophany is it's Jesus showing up in the Old Testament. There's some different examples of that. One is with Joshua outside of Jericho, and others with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they're in the fiery furnace, right? There's this other man that's there. Here's another example of this Christophany of it's Jesus. Maybe not going by that name yet, but it's Jesus. And he asks Jacob, what is your name? Here's the thing. The name Jacob was a shameful name to have. It meant heel. It meant hoof. It meant rear. It meant footstep. It meant heel grabber. See, he was a twin. And when he came out grabbing the heel of his brother. And so he was named heel. He was named rear. He was named heel grabber, usurper, right? There's a lot of these things that it was not a good name to have. And he had lived up to that name up until this point. But the new name that was given to him by God was Israel. He says, from now on, your name will be Israel. And the name Israel means God persists. It means one who perseveres with God. And by changing Jacob's name, God was also giving him a new identity. So to really see how this applies to us, what I want to do is I want us to keep in mind the attributes of God we looked at earlier, and I want to take a look at the most read and quoted chapter in the Bible, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, Jehovah Rohi. I shall not want, Jehovah Jireh. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters, Jehovah Shalom, my peace. He restores my soul, Jehovah Rapha, my healer. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake, Jehovah Tzidkenu, my righteousness. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, Jehovah Shammah, the Lord who is present. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, Jehovah Nisi, my banner. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup runneth over, Jehovah Makadesh, my sanctifier. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Jehovah Shammah, the Lord who is present. God is all of these things. Who is he to you? Take a moment and think about that question. And we'll see you in the next class.